Hi guys, thanks for tuning in today to our latest series on the Next Level podcast called The Coaching Classroom, where we're going to be speaking to elite practitioners from the field, academics, and various other people from the coaching area, looking at how you guys can improve your game and your coaching and discussing contemporary topics and things like that. So watch this space.
Thanks for that, Josh. Today we have our favorite lecturer from Oxford Brookes, Danny Newcombe on. Thank you, Danny, for joining us.
So, Danny, have you been busy recently then?
Good afternoon, gents. Yes, very busy. Thank you, Josh. Mixture of coaching, Reading, which is a domestic National League programme, coaching Wales, international sort of hockey, although mainly camp-based at the minute, lecturing at Oxford Brookes University, and doing a load of coach development work in Premier League, ECB, and VIS at the minute. So yeah, flying around at the minute, as well as looking after my new puppy. So they're sort of my main like time drains at the minute.
Well, thank you very much for sort of taking your time out today then, especially playing away from the puppy. I guess that's kind of the most important one out of all the ones you've mentioned.
Yeah, she's currently asleep, but anything for you two fine gentlemen, not a problem.
So I guess recently I've been reading a book called The Barcelona Way, Unlocking the DNA of a Winning Culture by a guy called Damien Hughes. That's sort of really interesting the way he speaks about sort of a numerous sort of areas that accumulate together to create a culture. But I guess it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts from the wide variety of elite backgrounds that you worked in to sort of what are your thoughts on how to create a culture in elite sport?
How to create a culture. Well, I know I'm not a theoretical expert on culture, but my kind of take on it is you don't create a culture, you're part of one that sort of is constantly reproducing itself. So you're kind of existing within it, and by existing within it, you have a limited ability to shape it. My feeling is culture is shaped by all of the people within that environment. So it's kind of an outcome or a product of the way the people act and behave. So if you get a certain group of people together, they will act and behave in a certain way, which will then start to form a culture which then reproduces itself. So you're a bit more of a passenger as a coach than you probably think. I actually think people go, "Oh, you've got a really good culture with the Welsh group. And how have you done that? That's you guys shaping that." And you go, there's probably a little bit of that maybe implicitly going on just by the fact that we're in it and our values and behaviours are X and Y. But also it's probably a product of the fact that we've got 30 guys in our group who have, a great set of values and beliefs, and that reproduces the culture itself. I do believe one of the best things you can do is get the right people in the building or the right people in the squad. I was chatting to a guy called Sam Jarman who talks about people's actions and decisions are all a product of their values and beliefs. So until you've changed someone's values and beliefs, you're probably not going to impact their actions and behaviours. So getting a group of like-minded people with similar values and beliefs tends to create a culture that's quite coherent within that group. So, and actually, if you've got someone in your group who has a different set of values and beliefs, it'll either be really difficult because they'll clash, and their actions and behaviours won't conform with what the actions and behaviours are of the rest of the group. So there'll either be a clash, they'll either leave, or they'll either start to normalise their behaviours based on the group. And there's so many examples of players that are different in a different group. So when they're in their club setting, they behave very differently to the way they do within an international setting. So their values and beliefs are probably the same, but their behaviour is probably shaped a little bit more by the norm of the group. So that for me would be how I see it. And then I'd probably be a bit more micro-political about it than you hear all the words on the walls and the values and the those types of things that for me are we do have a set of values that we have for the Welsh group that we've constructed over years. I think it's easy to say the words on the wall. If actually everyone buys into them and they mean something to people and they become a way of acting, then I think they're really powerful. I think there's a danger of how do I put this? If you're new to a team and you come into a culture, so you get a new team together, like a university, you go, this is our team values. They're not constructed by the group.
No.
They're enforced on them, so they actually don't have too much meaning or reference for them, so I don't think they'll shape their behaviours. If there's a group of people that shape a set of values and want to write them down, then crack on for me. If you've got a group who don't feel like they need to do that, then I don't think writing them down is going to be the thing that makes the difference.
It was interesting talking before we were on, just before you joined us, Danny. Kabir mentioned it, raised a really good point around sort of that culture, and rather than it being imposed upon the athletes themselves, do you think there's a use in sort of implementing key players, for example, in sort of trying to create an environment that you'd like? Or
I think you'll read some stuff in some of the literature that talks about cultural architects. So these are the people they sort of highlight that potentially have a bigger pull or a bigger steer on what the culture and the values and behaviours of the group are. So they tend to set them, people tend to copy them. So the way they behave and act tends to have quite a big pull. So I think you need to understand as a coach who those people are, and you might need to influence them. But you need to influence their beliefs and values, not their actions and behaviours, because they're an output. So getting deeper with them around why are you here? Why do you play for this team? What's your role here? What's important to you? What do you value? What do you believe? And then shaping their behaviour that way, I think is more powerful than going, I need you to act like this. Because then that doesn't become authentic. And actually, when pressure comes, people tend to migrate back to their kind of default values and beliefs and behaviours. So that's key. And it's not always your captain or your best player. There are certain players in the group that just have more, as we get to the sociology, more capital, more pull, more influence. Some are aware of it, some aren't. Some can be shaped, some can't. But I look at the Welsh squad now, and we don't see each other sometimes for a month at a time, but we just snap back into action as soon as we see each other again. It's like a family, really. And we have a sort of MO how we act. It's just like putting a pair of comfy shoes back on, and everyone just kind of. And we don't have any. Sounds like a teacher. We don't have any behavioural stuff to deal with. I guess we don't have any behaviours of the athletes that are away from what we'd expect. So we don't really need to do much shaping at the moment. That makes sense, because we've got a group that's been together for about 6 years now. So I think it's a lot harder at the start when you've got a new group. I think once a group's been together for a long period, if it's good, that's great, because you don't need to do much. If it's not good, that's a problem, because they've been together so long and they're still, I guess, dysfunctional, or the culture isn't one of alignment. And everyone says, oh, we've got a great culture or a good culture. I don't really know what they mean by that. What is a good culture? I think if you've got a good culture, I think what that means is you've got a group of people who share and enjoy being part of that group and have the same values and beliefs, and therefore actions and behaviours, so we're coherent. That doesn't mean it's better than someone else's culture. It just means there's a sense of alignment between everyone within it.
Go on, Cabs, go on, mate.
I mean, nowadays, I think you can take, if we're looking culturally, we see a lot of coaches coming back in the Premier League. So we see Ole Gunnar Solskjaer back at United. We see Frank Lampard back at Chelsea. We see Arteta back at Arsenal. Do you think that provides some sort of value for the players? Because they obviously played at the clubs during what we could consider some of their prime years. Is that a good way, how we're seeing professionally to create culture now?
I'd suggest it doesn't have that much impact, would be my honest thought. I I think from a club point of view, it's great to have someone back that's played for the club and there's an identity associated with it, a commitment to the club. But there's just as many examples of great managers who are clubs that they haven't played at. And I wouldn't suggest that is a way of establishing an effective culture. It's interesting, isn't it? Because what worked for those athletes and the culture for them when they were a player, there's a completely different set of players there. So then you're like trying to enforce old values onto a new set. Well, for me, that for me doesn't have too much impact. The ability of the coach to flex around the new players is what I think is more important. The one thing with football that's tough is how the turnover in the squads. So the fact you're turning over so many players every year means how do you find a culture that's sort of longitudinal or more established when you've got so many new bodies or faces and personalities in the building? The advantage of an international group like Wales is you can't go and play for another country. So actually, we keep a group together. Whereas the club side with Reading, we've probably had eight out, 8 in again. All of a sudden, it's different this year. It's just different because it's a product of the people in the building or on the AstroTurf if you're a hockey player.
Okay. Really interesting speaking about. I've kind of got another question here. I'm probably going to try and blabber it out because I've got it in my head, but I don't know how I'm going to verbalize it. But I'll try anyway. So, do you think that the environment and the way your teams behave is sort of more shaped by the players themselves, or do you think it's shaped more by the coach and their philosophy? And if it is the latter, then how much of it is their philosophy actually that important in shaping how their team behaves?
The answer's both. It's the integration of the coach's philosophy and behavior and the environment that he creates or she creates or the staff team create. So it's you as a coach have quite a big impact on the environment you create. So just by the practices you do, the tasks you ask them, the things you do in and around a training camp, pre, post, during the meetings, like you create not just an environment on the pitch, but an environment in and around it. I think how you act and behave as a coach then has a massive influence on that environment as well. I think within performance sport, we're guilty of thinking you have to be super serious and sort of aggressive and aggro all the time because it's performance. Whereas actually, I'm a little bit the other. I think you could have performance behaviors and do the things that are required to be performance driven and have a really positive, enjoyable space to be in. And I think that's the key thing with the Welsh stuff is everyone loves coming to camp. We love being part of it. And they train really, really hard. And they work incredibly hard. We don't have to almost shout and be serious all the time in order for that to happen. So I think, yes, as a coach, your philosophy will have an impact on the environment you create. But also there's a lot that you can't control, which is the personalities and the people that are in your group and how they then interact with that environment. Some, but not as much as we think. I think those places that have the great culture, I think it's a bit of luck with the people you have in the group. And if you have 5 or 6 really good people that are the cultural architects, I think you're in for a really nice space, group, people, time. If you've got some really difficult people in that group, I don't think it matters what your philosophy is as a coach, or what you try, they're not going to interact with the environment in a positive way. So there's loads of examples. I mean, the good debate in cricket was around Kevin Peterson, wasn't it? Around having one of the best players in the world and asking him not to play. But I think the impact he must have been having on that experience of the other players and the culture and the environment meant that his playing ability didn't outweigh that. So he got asked not to play. I don't know the detail and I don't know what went on, so it's hard to judge, but that's just an armchair view from the outside. It took guts to make that decision as a coaching team and as a management team to ask one of your best players or tell one of your best players that their services are no longer required. But actually, it seemed to have a positive impact in the long run.
Yeah.
Looking, sorry, finish.
Go on, Caps.
So looking at your coaching journey, whenever you did start coaching at, let's say, Wales, how is your view on culture changed? What are some things that you did back then that you think was wrong, in a way to help guide coaches who are fairly new or who are looking to develop a more strong found philosophy, a more molded culture for their set of athletes right now?
Yeah. Mistakes I've made. Don't be afraid to get rid of players who are rowing in the opposite direction to the way you want the group to go.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how good they are. Normally they are the best players. There's something in that that means that happens quite a lot. And one of the mistakes I made was, yes, you want to invest a serious amount of energy and effort in trying to influence and change that player's behaviour, actions, beliefs, whatever you want to call it, in order for it to get them rowing in the right direction. But there is a certain point where you just need to go, well, this isn't working. We need to go in a different direction. And I think that's one of the things I definitely didn't do early enough as a coach. It's a brave decision, and I don't think I was brave enough when I was younger to do that. And you almost sort of are more worried about the short-term performance because that player not being there will have an impact. But actually, long-term, I mean, let's look at Arsenal at the minute. It'd be interesting to know what's actually going on there with Ozil and why he's not even in the matchday squad and not even playing, probably training on his own, despite being one of the best players, potentially has the ability to be one of the best players in that team. I think that's an example of a manager being brave.
I think you've got another example there of Ferguson at Man United when he got rid of Keane and Stan. I think it was Jaap Stan, arguably two of the best players in their squad, if not the world at the time when they left. And it's like, well, kudos to Ferguson for sort of having the guts to do that. Obviously, but I guess from your point of view, Danny, do you think that shows a certain element of trust in the other squad members that they have in you, to trust that they know what you're doing? Obviously, if you've just got rid of, for example, Kevin Peterson per se, then it's kind of a big play. Or do you think they're thinking, well, not really too sure about this bloke anymore?
I think implicitly it shows that you value the team and we, and over an individual or your specific game. So there's definitely something that I think you're implicitly sending a message that doesn't matter how good you are, if you're not buying in and not helping the team and being part of the group, then your services are not required. So I think you implicitly send the message, and I almost think you implicitly send the message by not doing it, because you send a message saying it doesn't matter if you buy in if you're really good. And actually, I think you start to undo a lot of stuff there. So I think that like you have to act, I think, because not acting is a form of acting anyway. So actually, there's something in there you have to cut out, because otherwise it will rot the group. And there'll be a point at which if you leave it too long, that it's past the point where you can actually you can resurrect it almost. So yeah, those are big decisions, I think. But I think it does show you that there's a limit to how much a coach can really influence people and shape someone's behaviour. And actually, sometimes you've got to change who's in the room. And just because you could be a huge part of steering a culture in one group, move to another group, be traded, go to another team, and all of a sudden find yourself in a completely different space. And because that group have a different culture and a different set of values and behaviours to what you've got, and you don't fit in. So your ability to adapt and conform as a coach or a player to the culture that's within the group, or you go out and find yourself another club. Plenty of players that you've seen move from club to club where they've been, brilliant, happy and productive and all those sorts of things. They move to another club and it doesn't work. Now, some of that's style of play and those sorts of things. But I do think some of it is the the culture and then how well they fit in. There's interesting stuff around the Barcelona way.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read it, so excuse my ignorance, but would that suggest that there's a lot of players at that club that come from that region? And
Yes, yeah, they kind of talk about numerous different types of, from like a business point of view, and sort of the elements that come around were they draw parallels between the business industry and the sporting industry, and they say that there's an element of trust in there and forward thinking, sort of thinking down the line rather than here and now. I think they draw a lot of similarities between companies that have succeeded well in business and thinking forward, and those in football as well. And like at Barcelona, obviously the investment in the academy with when Guardiola was there and Bobby Robson as well. I think there's a big focus on the bringing the development side of through rather than just the performance there and then.
Yeah, there's some examples, really good examples in England of football clubs that are operating like that. And I think we're starting to see the benefits of it. So yeah, I'd agree with that. The other way I think that we talked earlier about philosophy, I think the biggest way to influence culture is just to do and be the actions and behaviours that you want to see, rather than talking about them and telling people to do them. I think the best way to influence culture is to act and behave in a way that you'd like other people to. And I think that you can't say one thing as a coach or a leader around this is how, and then act differently. So I think that's one of the key bits for me in terms of Kabir's question around what did I learn. I think an inconsistency between saying how you want them to act and then acting and behaving yourself. That disconnect, players will just jump all over, and I'm not listening to him if he behaves like that. So like if we say, oh, we're about respect and discipline, and then I jump all over an umpiring decision and scream and shout and get myself sent off, all of a sudden I'm portraying a set of behaviours that's very different to the values and the culture I'm trying to cultivate within the group. So I guess the message for coaches will be consistency between what you say, you act, and what you do. Is probably one of the biggest things I think you can get right.
I think an interesting point to make here is that, so do you think there has to be an alignment between your philosophy as a coach and the environment that you're working in? So obviously the whole club's environment. So an alignment between your philosophy, the environment that you're working in, and the values and beliefs that the players have themselves.
Yeah, hugely. I mean, there's always going to be a little bit of difference between them, but I think a small amount is a good thing, and you can work in and around that. Mm-hmm. If they're miles apart, it's just not going to work. You know, sure. I think you see I think it was Bielsa, one of the French clubs he went to. He lasted a week. Mm-hmm. You know, I just think he went there and he went, this is not going to work. Mm-hmm. I'm so, for whatever, it could be, I don't know the detail, could be something contractual or something, but it could just be actually the way you guys do things. It's not for me. And that admitting that that's not the right fit for you, I think is a really good thing. And then trying to find the right club or space for you to coach within that meet where, like you said, the values, beliefs, culture of that group of people, yours and the club, are all pretty aligned, is where you'll get, I think, the best from yourself and from your players.
It's interesting that, because I completely agree. And a question for you: say if 2 out of the 3 do fit, so your philosophy fits with the philosophy and the values and beliefs of your players, but the sort of the missing link there is the environment of the club, then what do you just throw the toys out the pram and pack it in, do you reckon? Or do you think, actually, I'm going to try and create a shift here and try and change the whole club?
I think it's more important that your values and beliefs match that of the players than the club. Mm-hmm. The players are more important because ultimately, if you've got buy-in between the players and the management team, you're in a good spot. I think it then comes down to how flexible the club is, and where the wiggle room is and where the compromise is. People are always going to have different values and beliefs. It's how far apart they are that's probably the key thing. And if your values as a club are we want people to love playing for the club, we want this to be a really positive learning environment, and you've got that with your players and everything else, but then the way that the club's acting is not creating that, then you've got an issue, and you either deal with it or it doesn't work.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, very deep questions, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think I look at our staff team at work at Oxford Brookes, but within our coaching sort of staff group, I just think you've got a group of people who share a similar approach and a similar view on the world. And I think, yes, we don't always think the same, and theoretically we come from different areas, and those types of things we challenge each other, but actually what we value is the student experience. What we value is challenging students and creating problem solvers. So actually, it doesn't mean we go about it the same way, but it does mean we're connected in some way and aligned.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, speaking about like the high turnover, when you do get a new player who's maybe in their first or second year of professional, or sometimes you might be blessed with getting a veteran player from another club, which one do you face? Which one do you think possesses more of a challenge for you? Someone who's already ingrained in a way, or someone who's fresh and needs molding as a coach?
Someone younger is more likely to conform to what the cultural norms are of that group, I think. Not always, but I suspect that's more likely than someone who's more ingrained and more experienced coming in. Will tend to have a more established and ingrained set of values and beliefs, and therefore, if there's a clash with those, we'll find it difficult. It doesn't mean they won't find their way in that club. It just means there might be a bit of a process to start with, where they start to see what they can and how they can and can't behave, and how that will fit together.
And roughly, what would that process look like? Because I imagine it must be different club to club. But let's say for you, what would you do if you were to get someone? Just throwing a name out there, like if you were to get someone like Kevin Peterson in your team, and what would you do to help them buy in with the culture that might seem different to yours?
I think someone like that, it's either going to work or it's not, and you'll know pretty quickly. Yeah. It's probably, if it works, it'd be brilliant because it'll be all in. If it doesn't, I think you might as well not bother. I do think for a group, there's no substitute for spending time together. And I think like the shared experiences of time together, being away together, socializing together, I think are under. No, they're not undervalued by clubs, because a lot of, you talk to a lot of rugby clubs, they have coffee groups and they spend lots of time together, and like that's where you build sort of cohesion and a group that's more aligned. I think it's making it really difficult at the minute with the current restrictions on the world for us to socialize together as a playing and staff group, which means we miss those really important opportunities to get to know each other, understand each other, and therefore to establish relationships and bonds, which then means, when the going gets tough, like, are we as tight as we need to be? And actually sometimes a horrific loss or a loss, a tough loss followed by a really good social event pulls the group together so that we learn from it and we don't let it happen again. Like that for me is just as important part of the process.
So I've got another question for you, Danny. It's kind of a different lens, but looking at the same thing. So in terms of altering another coach from sort of a CPD point of view or a coach development point of view, how easy do you think it is? And sort of what challenges do you think you probably face when you're trying to shape and develop another coach's, say, culture or their philosophy?
Yeah, so if you I just think you do recruitment of coaches into your coaching team, or I was lucky enough to coach with Zach for 10 years, where we had a very similar set of values and beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And that, not identical, but like a set of values and beliefs that really interacted well together. I'm yet to work with a coach who I don't share a really close set of values and beliefs. It'd be interesting to know. I just think it'd be similar to the Kevin Peterson. There'd be a point at which it just wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd come to a point where actually we can't carry on with this because we're pulling the boat in two different directions.
Mm-hmm.
You often see managers in football take their entire backroom staff around with them.
Yeah.
That's not a surprise for me. There is potentially a limitation to it, as in it's an echo chamber and you just reproduce what each other is saying. You don't get as much challenge. So there's a limit to two people or three or four people who share the similar view on the world, because potentially our idea generation is not as good. But then there's a huge benefit to that time we spent together and establishing a culture between us as a coaching team. Simon, my colleague at work, and Dr. Phelan explained culture the best to me. It's like trying to explain Christmas at your home. The way you act and the traditions and the behaviours that go on at Christmas in your house. You go to Christmas at someone else's house, if you've been there, it's just odd. They do things in the wrong order. They don't do it the right way around. And actually, and that almost is like a coaching team. You learn what the way we do stuff is. And when someone different comes in, they want to do stuff differently. So they either change it for the good and we might adapt, or they conform and come with you, or they don't hang around. Nailing cause and effect within learning or culture is so hard. So how do you know what that culture is really a product of? How do you know what's had the biggest impact on that culture? Like, the coach is going to go, oh yeah, we did this and that changed the culture. How do you know? Like, you're guessing, I think. Yes, have good intent. Yes, try stuff. But the Clive Woodward pink fluffy dice analogy from his book is one of the best ones for me. Like, when they won the World Cup, he basically said, if we hung a 12-foot pink fluffy dice from a tree in our training ground, every rugby club in the country would start hanging a 12-foot pink fluffy dice from their training ground. And just because they think that's the thing that had the impact on us winning. Like, it's just so complex. Culture is another one of those things, like learning, that's so complex. How do you know what's having the impact? How do you know if you're having any impact? Like, yeah, you don't. I think you can try and you can shape it and you can push, but ultimately your passenger is more than you think you are.
For me, I think it comes down to what the environment and what you yourself view as a success. For me, I'm more about, in terms of, I prefer to favour and focus on the process rather than the end result. As a snapshot, that is. So obviously you do want, because you're in coaching, to improve performance and improve people, and trying to be focused around that process rather than be focused around the result of the snapshot in that week is kind of important for that culture. And I think if you get quite a few people buying into that longitudinal process, then it is a fruitful environment and a nice culture to be in. But if I can imagine an elite performance,
if you share those values.
Yeah.
If you don't, it's not the culture, it's not the space for you.
True.
And that's the key bit, isn't it? It's that alignment piece we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Your perception, what you value, is really clear. So if you go into an environment that's not something that's valued, you won't like it.
True.
Some players are not interested in anyone else, or the club, or the wider city, or whatever those values pieces are. They're interested in their own agenda, their goal scoring record, their Instagram account. Like, how do you manage those two conflicting sets?
Well, according to what you said before, you just get rid of them. But
doesn't mean there's a line. There's a bandwidth, and there's a sort of drift away from it that's acceptable and okay. And someone did say to me once that you can manage one dickhead. You get two, you're in for a tough time. Depends how big the dickhead is, I think. And if it's you, well, that's the other one.
Bit of a question that relates to this. Do you see the merit in a reward and punishment system in high performance sport? Because I mean, like you just said, some people chase having the most goals or chase, having a good social media presence and look at professional sport as a means to, living a luxurious lifestyle. Do you see the merit in rewarding either intrinsically or extrinsically your athletes, or is there also a punishment system that goes along the lack of buy-in in some cultures?
As Sam Jarman would say, depends on your ontological primitive, Kabir. Depends if you're materialistic. If deep down you're you're materialistic and material reward is something that motivates you, then fines and rewards will be something that would influence your behavior. If you're not materialistic and you're more interested in the experience, then it won't. Fines and rewards won't have any impact. The beauty of the Welsh setup that I coach within is there isn't any material reward. Like, it's about the experience and the environment. So if we started bringing in a fine and reward system, it just wouldn't work. I'm not saying it wouldn't work at a club elsewhere, but within our setup. And the best thing about the Welsh setup is, we haven't got any cash. Our contact time is minimal. Our player group is small. The players paid to play. But because of that, they give it their annual leave. They get up in the morning before work and train. You're damn sure they're doing it for the right reasons. If you don't want, if you really part of that squad, it's because you really want to be. And it's because the experience of being part of that squad outweighs and actually doesn't just outweigh everything you do it willingly. So actually, if you start finding people, you would just literally, it would just tear the culture apart. It would be such a clash to what it is. If you're in a sport that is materially driven, that's tough. I mean, I wouldn't know how to manage that. You see lots of clubs with big fine lists and players fine because I think that's the only way they can, or they perceive the only way they can get hold of them. So yeah, there's a huge advantage to having no cash in some ways, because you don't create people who are there for the material reward. They're there for the experience, and therefore it's easy.
It's like the analogy of the rats leaving a sinking ship, isn't it? You know what know the people who you can rely on when the push comes to shove in certain aspects, which would be easier for you to sort of notice rather than an international team that get paid hundreds of thousands, and when they're on international break, they go away and do things that they shouldn't necessarily be doing. And then obviously you wouldn't get anything like that. And in terms of the culture, I guess that helps massively, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's huge. Like you've got an investment in it as a person because the experience is more important to you. It's the only thing that's important to you. If you've made a decision to go to a club for money over the experience, then you're clearly valuing material reward. Now there's a balance to it. You've got to pay the bills and you've got a certain amount of time to earn money to support your family. So don't begrudge anyone earning a lot of money to play football. Fair play to you. But it's almost like if you're choosing between a club that's paying you £20,000 a week and another one that's paying you £21,000 a week, those two amounts of money are too similar for me to make a decision on. Make it based on the experience and the environment. Would be the key thing if that's important to you. So yeah, we live in a capitalist society where we need money. So and that's the neoliberal way we work. But actually, in hockey, because we're an amateur sport, that helps us. I think it changes. It doesn't necessarily. It changes the culture hugely. I mean, for some people, there's still the Instagram follows and the attention and the fame and those types of things that you get from being involved, which you could say is material reward. But and this is not an expert, and I suggest you get Sam on to talk about this. That's like, if you're seeking material reward, you'll always seek material reward. You'll never have enough. So if you seek experiences, and that's where you get your enjoyment from, then you'll seek more experiences. You'll live in the moment.
Mm. No, well, thank you very much.
Spiritual and Zen, didn't it?
Got very deep and very philosophical.
I was about to just cross my legs and just drift off.
Yeah, there's a gong going off behind me. That's the
Yeah.
end.
Intense coming across. Brilliant. Then I think that's a good place to leave it today. Thank you very much, mate, for that. Much appreciated.
That's right, James. Happy to jump on again if you ever need me.